Balatro. Unless you've spent the past year living under a rock, you've probably at least heard of this incredibly addictive roguelike deck builder. A game that's basically taken the gaming community by storm. A game adored by so many different people in so many different ways. A game with so many positive reviews, so many fans, so much passion. A game that I absolutely suck at. Yeah, as much as I hate to admit it, this game did not treat me kindly when I first started playing it. I think I'd seen so many people have so much success with this game online when they first started that I just kind of assumed it'd be exactly the same for me. I mean, hey, I play a lot of card games. I typically know what I'm doing with games like this. This should be easy for me, right? Wrong. Very, very wrong. But after several attempts involving a lot of rage quitting and deleting of footage, I finally got a run that I was happy enough with to keep. This particular run opened with me finding an abstract joker and a misprint, both of which are just sort of generally good jokers in the early game, as well as a crafty joker and a Four Fingers, which kind of pushed me towards doing a flush build. I was even able to bolster my economy a bit thanks to finding a rocket later on. So my first few antes basically just involved me collecting Jupiters and suit-changing tarot cards to try and increase my odds of winning with flushes. I did eventually end up pivoting away from flushes though in favor of some kind of full house build involving odds and face cards, I guess. For some reason I find myself going for full houses a lot in this game, and I'm not really sure why that is. I guess it's just a decently powerful hand that gets easier to build around as your deck and jokers start to come together. Anyway, this run sadly just didn't have the scaling power to keep up with the increasingly more demanding blinds, and it ended up petering out around halfway through ante 7. Still, I felt good about my progress, and I was confident that I'd be able to win if I just kept pushing forward. The next run I did got off to a pretty good start, with an early crazy joker pushing me in the direction of straights before I decided to grab a pair of spare trousers in case I felt like going for full houses again. Despite my lack of clear direction here, things seemed to be going alright, with the shop even giving me a polychrome supernova at some point. That is, until I reached a certain boss blind. The Serpent's gimmick is that it will always cause you to draw 3 cards after every action, no matter how many you played or discarded, so my usual strategy of discarding as many cards as possible until I drew the hand I needed probably isn't the best way to go here. Well, guess who didn't realize that until it was too late. Yeah, kinda hard to win when your hand looks like this. So, third time into the fray, and this was shaping up to be my most promising run yet. An early golden joker to boost my economy and photograph to boost my score meant that I was cruising through the first few blinds like nobody's business. I also made sure to grab a walkie-talkie while I was at it, figuring I could use the extra molt to make the photograph even more potent. After a bit more bumbling around, I also found myself a smiley face to add even more molt to my face cards, as well as a sock and buskin to trigger all of my face cards again. And then of course there was my ace in the hole. The Campfire. A card that gains a higher multiplier the more cards you sell, which means you can just keep on buying plan and tarot cards and selling them to make it even more powerful. Things were looking fantastic for this run. That is until I reached the final boss blind. The Verdant Leaf, a blind that forces you to sell a joker if you want any of your cards to score. So I reluctantly parted with my walkie-talkie and... yeah, I'm not even sure why I was worried. For my fourth run, I decided to pivot over to the blue deck to see if I could fare as well over there. Hands do tend to be better than discards, so theoretically this should be easier. Right? It didn't really go great at first. The lack of any kind of clear direction meant that I was really struggling against a lot of the early blinds, and it really did feel like I was just barely scraping by at times. But an early hallucination to generate a bunch of tarot cards and a trading card to thin my deck a bit meant that I was eventually able to stabilize, even picking up a voucher to increase my total hands per round to 6. So after grabbing a Shoot the Moon to make my queens more powerful, I ended up settling into yet another face card build, and that was enough to carry me all the way to the end. With a final boss blind that literally didn't do anything at all, and a single hand sending my score into the millions, I was feeling really good about myself. Unfortunately, my next run didn't go nearly as well. It was another run where I basically tried to force full houses, sort of based around this here Fibonacci joker, which gives you extra molt if you score using certain cards. It got off to a pretty good start, but it ultimately just didn't have the consistency it needed in order to be successful. And that combined with me just straight up forgetting how to use my hanging chad led to me falling short at the beginning of Ante 8 by a mere 1,000 chips. But after that heartbreaking display of incompetence, I was able to rally on my next run with a flush build, thanks to an incredibly lucky Sigil Spectral card combining with my Wrathful Joker, as well as a bit of assistance from some steel cards and powerful multiplier jokers. I even attempted Endless Mode for the first time after this run, but it turned out that 7 million was just a bit too much for this deck to pull off. Still, the fact that I even made it that far I think is pretty impressive. Of course, that's when the trouble really started. The next deck I tried, the green deck, proved to be my greatest challenge yet. This deck was a bit different from the others I tried in the sense that you don't earn interest on the money you save anymore, with your earnings instead being determined by your unused hands and discards. Because of that, there's really no reason for me to hoard my dollars like I usually do, but I guess this new playstyle was kind of throwing me off because I was sucking ass in my first few attempts with this deck. My first run started out as another full house build, but once again, consistency issues began creeping up pretty quickly. Which is really bad when you're up against the hook, which discards those much-needed cards you were saving every time you play a hand. My second run was marred by having absolutely zero sense of direction, forcing me to call it after just a couple of antes. My third run was shaping up to be a really powerful flush build, even getting assistance from the Vagabond to generate a ton of tarot cards, but was completely dismantled thanks to the Goad showing up and ruining my entire build. Thankfully, it was the fourth run that ended up pulling me through. A combination of using DNA to duplicate my kings, Hiker to increase the amount of chips those kings earned, and Photograph and Hanging Chad to trigger all of those kings again meant that I was able to cruise past the finish line on this run no problem. Even with some questionable choices in the shop. My next run was honestly kinda crazy. It was against the dreaded black deck, considered one of the most difficult decks in the game to win with. Having an extra Joker slot is nice and all, but being down a hand not only makes it more likely you'll miss your mark due to having less chances to hit it, it also reduces the amount of money you're getting after each round, since part of that is based off of how many hands you have left over. So I settled in, picking up a To the Moon to help with the economic problems this deck creates, as well as a Juggler to increase consistency and another Hallucination to give me a bunch of tarot cards. As for the rest of them, yeah, it's another full house build, one that I'm honestly kinda shocked even worked out for me at all. Seriously, I only had 3 scoring Jokers throughout most of it, and I was just barely scraping by a lot of the time, but I still made it through in one piece. Probably because of that telescope voucher I picked up in the beginning. That thing is really potent. Ironically, my next deck was the one where trouble started to pop up for me again. The Crystal deck was a deck that I wasn't terribly excited about to begin with. I'm not usually one to hoard consumables, so having an extra slot for one didn't seem particularly useful to me. And that's not even mentioning the 2 Fools you start with that I had no clue how to use. But after losing my first run to an unfortunate Pillar Boss blind, and my second run because I probably shouldn't have taken that Ouija Spectral card, I decided to do something a bit different. I skipped the first blind. And I'm glad I did, because that ended up being one of the most enjoyable runs yet. Getting a holographic riffraff to generate some more random stuff, I ended up skipping again later on for a holographic Odd Todd, followed by a hack to re-trigger all my lower ranked cards, and a throwback to further benefit from all the blinds I'd skipped. But the Joker that really made this run was Shortcut, which allows you to put gaps in your straights to make them way more consistent. So naturally, I went for a straight build. And naturally, I crushed it. But before I get too full of myself, let's move on to our next deck. This is the Nebula deck, which starts you off with a Telescope voucher at the cost of only giving you 1 consumable slot. We've already seen how powerful the Telescope voucher can be, since always being able to upgrade your most powerful hand can turn some runs into absolute breezes. But it's a lot less useful if you, well, don't actually know what your most powerful hand is, and that was certainly the case for me starting off. But hey, turns out you don't really need to have a plan early on when your early build is just a baseball card and a bunch of uncommons. And after getting a card sharp off an uncommon Joker tag, I eventually settled into a 2-pair build, a hand I knew I'd be able to easily duplicate each round to really make my card sharp pop off. Add to that another throwback and a hiker to generate a ton of chips, and this was a pretty easy win for me. The next run, though, that was my craziest run yet. It was with the Ghost deck, a deck that's pretty easy to pop off with thanks to the multitude of spectral cards in the shop, as well as the free hex you're provided with in the beginning. And oh boy did I pop off. A free rare Joker and an Ankh at the second shop? Yeah, nothing spells victory like 2 polychrome copies of the Order right off the bat. And I found a blueprint later on too, and a 4 fingers? Yeah, this was clearly a blessed run, even with a close call on the needle. And even though I lost to the mouth in Ante 9 due to a misclick. Moving on to deck number 9, the Abandon deck, whose gimmick is that it contains no face cards. This is generally a net positive since a thinner deck means you're more likely to consistently find the cards you need, but losing out on some of your higher value cards can certainly sting at times. Anyway, this run was pretty crazy simply because I managed to snag 3 polychrome tags, one of which netted me a Vampire, a Joker I'd never used before. The way to use this Joker is pretty simple. slap a bunch of enchantments on your cards, then rip them off to feed your increasingly scary movie monster. From there, I mostly just skated to the finish with my other polychromes, as well as a crazy joker to power up my straights, which even turned holographic later on thanks to a lucky wheel of fortune. And the final white stake deck, the checkered deck, which makes it so that all the suits in your opening deck are either hearts or spades. That makes it the perfect deck for a flush build, and that's exactly what I did. The Tribe, Supernova, Lustful Joker, even a blueprint later on, and an Observatory voucher to make any Jupiter cards I hold on to way stronger? Yeah, I absolutely smoked this run, needless to say. Even if I still couldn't win a round in Ante 11. Well, that may be all the initial decks out of the way, but there's still so much left to do in this game. I've still got 7 more difficulty levels and 5 more decks to go through. But will I make it through all of them? Well, you'll just have to wait and see. Take care, everyone.